Hey everybody, today we are going to talk about the ego map for the Enneagram Type 9, often known as the Peacemaker, or I call them the RV of egos because they often like to have everything so peaceful around them. They're kind of like they want to hang out at the campground and chill out sometimes while the world can sometimes pass them by if they're not careful. But as always, this content is coming from my new book, Taming Your Money Monster, 9 Paths to Money Mastery with the Enneagram, and pre-orders are available from booksellers everywhere, and it comes out in a few weeks on July 8th. So please pre-order your copy and check it out. I think you're going to love it. And if you need help determining your Enneagram type, as always, you can follow this QR code to the IEQ9 Integrative Enneagram Test, and this is my unique link. And of course, I get a little kickback if you take the test through that link. So I'd appreciate the support if you want to know, if you want to take the most scientifically rigorous and accurate Enneagram assessment test out there. All right, let's jump into it. So how does the Type 9 become the Peacemaker? What does that mean? Well, we need to, of course, with all Enneagram types, jump into your childhood and talk about some of your childhood wounds. Because your Enneagram type, again, your personality has two components. It's got a nature component, which is your DNA and the stuff that you're kind of came pre-programmed with. But then there's the nurture part of your personality. You know, how your personality was shaped in your childhood environment, and that's what the Enneagram is going to teach us about. Like, how did you, in your infancy, in early childhood, develop some core coping mechanisms and defense strategies in order to navigate the reality around you? And it was helpful, and it's necessary and useful, and does all kinds of great things for you. But we need to explore the ways that it can become, your ego defenses can become unhealthy, lead into your money monsters, create financial suffering for you and for those that you love. And we're also going to then explore how you overcome some of the shadow side of your ego and move into the healthiest expression of your type to become a money master. All right, so here we go. Let's look at the ego map for Type 9. I'm going to start at the bottom here with your sacred wound. So your sacred wound is essential. It's how you individuated as a child to become a unique identity in the world. And your sacred wound happens because you have to imagine what life was like when you were in your mother's womb. What was your consciousness like? And so at the bottom half of the double cone Enneagram here, we're starting at the bottom. You're starting from a place of unconscious unity, meaning in the womb you were not aware of yourself. You didn't have a clear sense of what's me and what's not me. And you were kind of in this oceanic oneness and bliss in that sort of Edenic state, in a womb-like state in your child, in that early, as you were developing. But then you get popped out and surprise, you discover there's more to the world than just you. There's a lot of things out there, and you have to be mindful of them, because if you're not, a lot of those things can get you killed. So there's a physical umbilical cord that gets cut at birth, of course, but then there's a psychological umbilical cord that forms between you and your caregivers. It's a kind of an egoic codependence that allows your caregivers to do most of the driving of reality for you in your infancy. But that egoic codependence has to be cut over time, and hopefully slowly and hopefully gently, but some of it gets cut a little more severely than others, and that can be very traumatic. It's a traumatic experience for all of us in one way or another, but hopefully, but it can be done more subtly, and it can be done more harshly, and that can shape, the kind of the trauma that we end up going through life with. But anyway, so that psychological umbilical cord can only be cut by the sharpest negative emotions. And the sharpest negative emotions in all mammalian brains, we know this from the work of the affective neuroscientist Jaak Panksepp, that in all mammals, back in the limbic system of the brain, mid-region of the limbic system, is where the three core negative, we call the big three negative emotions happen. And that's anger, sadness, which can sometimes be seen as shame, that can also work, but it's really anger, sadness, and fear. So your psychological umbilical cord cut, if you were a 9, how that got severed was mostly through anger. And you may not feel like an angry person, and 9s tend to be very pleasant, and you to be very kind, and you're very gentle. You like things very peaceful around you. But part of the reason is because that sacred wound of anger, it created an internalized anger at yourself for not really being able to stand up for your needs, or it felt like expressing your desires and wants was sort of maybe futile. So there was really no point in standing up for yourself. And so it created this sort of internalized anger at yourself for not really being able in your childhood environment to meet your own needs, but also an externalized anger at the world around you for not meeting them either. Everyone's childhood is unique, and there isn't really a pattern necessarily for 9s that's explicit, but it tended to be maybe you had a very demanding sibling, maybe with a special needs sibling, or maybe you were in an environment where it wasn't very nurturing, where you had some structure, but you didn't really have a lot of emotional support. Expressing your needs wasn't going to do you much good. So you learn to sort of get along to get along. And that's kind of the default mode for most nines, is like, well, my environment around me isn't really safe. It isn't really meeting my needs, and I don't want to make waves and create problems and more stresses for myself and others. So I'm just going to sort of be this peacemaker and try really hard not to rock the boat. Because the greatest fear for a type 9 that comes out of their sacred wound is a fear of loss of wholeness or fragmentation. They're afraid that if they ever touch, so nines often aren't aware of their anger. It doesn't come out very often. It's very rare, and when it does, it tends to be kind of this volcanic explosion. It can be at times, or it can be really passive-aggressive behavior, kind of a stubborn resistance to change. But essentially what happens is their nines are afraid that if they really express their needs forthrightly, or if they stand up for themselves, or that it's going to create problems, it's going to create stress, it's going to create conflict, and that conflict could potentially cause this volcano of anger that they're sitting on top of to erupt. So nines are always trying to push their anger down. They're masters of suppression of their anger, and they deny it often, have a hard time acknowledging it even exists. But it kind of wears them. All this suppression of anger makes them, they get tired very easily. It's sort of, they get worn out by conflict. They get worn out very easily by the daily stresses of their life. And so it creates their greatest vice, which is sloth. Now, sloth doesn't mean they don't get stuff done. Sloth doesn't mean they're lazy exactly. It means that they have a fear of conflict. So they're slothful about addressing the problems in their life forthrightly, and being able to assert their needs and get their needs met. So it's a sloth, not necessarily, it can be a sloth of inaction, but it's mostly a sloth of like, okay, what nines need to learn is that real harmony. This is where we're going to talk to. I'm kind of jumping to the top of this really quickly, and I'll walk you through the steps to it. But essentially, what nines need to learn is how to create more harmony in their lives. So harmony comes after a conflict is resolved. And what the struggle for nines is they don't want to confront the problems in front of them. They're masters of avoiding conflict. And so problems don't get resolved and they build up, and it creates all kinds of stress in their life, including leading into their money monsters. So then this is all in your shadow structure, right? We're in the bottom half of the double cone Enneagram. And so you're moving from that state of unconscious unity, as we talked about a moment ago, into conscious separation. You're establishing your independence in the world through the development of your Enneagram type. But the nine doesn't want to look at, none of us want to look at our shadow. So we all have an ego addiction, a primary ego addiction, that kind of makes our worst vice and our greatest fear almost a virtue in a weird way. It makes it feel good when we're doing something that maybe isn't so helpful for us. And for type 8s, or excuse me, for type 9s, what that is your primary ego addiction is to evasion. It means you're evading the problems in front of you, you're evading conflict, because you want to keep everything as peaceful around you as possible. But eventually, over time, what can happen is that evasion of problems, or that sloth that kind of can create new problems that you were trying to avoid. In other words, the type 9 is trying to avoid conflict, but by avoiding conflict all the time, then the problems build up to kind of almost a catastrophic level, and then evading them more isn't going to solve the problem. Like that primary ego addiction is creating the very problem that the 9 doesn't want to have. And so we all have a backup secondary ego addiction. And what the secondary ego addiction is, it creates an ego stress response, which is kind of the opposite behavior of your normal daily driver. It's trying to undo, in a somewhat unhealthy, maladaptive way, but it's necessary to sort of undo some of the damage that your primary ego addiction is creating. And for a type 9, your secondary ego addiction is to fear. And what that means is fear is the primary ego addiction for a type 6. And what that means is you sort of temporarily start to look a bit more like a fearful type 6, and maybe do some worst case catastrophizing, or you get really scared about your present level of security. But it doesn't stand alone. That secondary ego addiction, it mixes with your sloth, which is your greatest vice. So that's why you're not becoming a 6. You're sort of looking like a 6 because you still have that sloth underlying motivating you in your shadow structure. So the sloth plus the fear creates your ego stress response, which is security seeking, meaning, all right, you're looking for someone maybe outside yourself to maybe rescue you, to come in and help you solve the problems that you're dealing with. Or it can become a rigid sort of passive-aggressive stubbornness to change. Like things around you are getting out of control, so you will retreat into yourself and become very maybe rigid and unable to make some of the changes. You're trying to get security from the status quo, essentially, is one way of looking at it. Or again, you're looking for some external authority. You're looking for a friend, your partner, your lover, your boss, whoever, somebody to come in and it kind of do some of the work for you that you've been evading, and give you some of that security temporarily until your ego the stress can release a little bit, and you can kind of go back to your normal way of being. So that's one way of looking at how those ego addictions play out and how your ego stress response works. But then that leads us, of course, into the most important part, which are your money monsters. So as always, there's 2 really unhealthy ways that we can relate to money. What I call the attachment theory of money, which is based on the attachment theory of relationships, for those of you who are already familiar with that concept. So what it says is that we can, if we're avoidant around money, then we tend to push money away or avoid the responsibilities of budgeting or bookkeeping, or we don't want to deal with it. And so for a type 9, I call them the Spud, meaning they kind of look like a couch potato when it comes to their financial life. They could get off the couch. It's like the person who should exercise but doesn't. It's like they're just avoiding it completely. So they're kind of the Spud, the couch potato, when it comes to their financial life. Or because they don't want to deal with the stresses and the conflict that all the money problems are creating. And then on the flip side, we've got the money anxious type 9, where they really want to change, but they're because of their ego addiction to evasion and the slothfulness about confronting the problems in front of them. They tend to have a flurry of activity, but their results kind of tend to be a dud because they may engage in a lot of what are seemingly productive tasks, but don't really get to the core issue that's in front of them because they're still evading the conflict that needs to be resolved in order for their money issues to really to get themselves to a place of real financial security in all areas of their financial life. And of course, there's really 4 pillars of your financial life that we all have, and that's earning, saving, investing, and giving. And most of us tend to be what I call the jumbled style when it comes to our relationship to money. To be anxious in one area and avoidant in another. So you might, for example, be an anxious earner, maybe earning a lot of money, but then you're an avoidant saver. You spend everything that comes in, so you never get to the saving part. And then you never get, of course, to the investing part. Or you might be a great investor and saver, but you're a terrible giver. You don't really ever give back to the community and to the people around you. So think about maybe the different ways that your money avoidance or money anxious can manifest in those 4 areas. And of course, you can be healthy in one area and not so healthy in another. But what we're trying to do in my book, Taming Your Money Monster, is help you to be healthy and secure in your relationship to money in all 4 areas of earning, saving, investing, and giving. So how do we do that? How do we get out of this ego trap, these ego addictions that are maybe causing financial suffering and personal suffering for ourselves? Well, again, it's not easy, and there's a whole list of tips and tricks you're going to find in my book. We'll walk you through it. But essentially what happens is our ego grows in the bottom half of the double cone Enneagram until it's developing our independence. But then we get to this space of conscious separation where our ego is so strong, it's grown to the point, it's like a blowfish, it's puffed up. It's sort of pushing everyone and everything else away, including our sense of connection to the divine or the sacred, whatever that is for you. And it kind of throws us into the dark night of the soul. And it can be often maybe a midlife crisis. It can be some external trauma that hits, whatever it is, and we tend to double down on our ego addictions because it's our only defense mechanism that we're really used to, and that tends to make things worse. And so what needs to happen is we need to let the pain and the suffering of this sort of maybe rock bottom moment or this really difficult crisis that we're facing, and it isn't a one and done. We can go through many dark nights of the soul. We can go through dark decades. I've been there, believe me. So again, I'm presenting this as a linear model, but of course life doesn't work that way. We can go up and down on this ego map many times in a day and over a lifetime. So the goal is to try to get you the healthiest expression of your type on a consistent basis. And again, my book, Taming Your Money Monster, will give you all the tips for that. But in that dark night, we need to break open and let that suffering soften our ego, let more compassion and some self-forgiveness, forgiveness for others, especially for the childhood wounds that may be causing all this suffering for us unconsciously. And then we can move into our enlightenment structure. And we're moving, again, so the bottom half of the double cone Enneagram, the first half of life is our journey to independence. It's a necessary journey. But then we need to move into the journey to interdependence, where that second half of life, we're moving from me, where everything's all about me, to a healthier sense of we, to a sense of community or connection across, in our immediate family, our wider community, and hopefully that can stretch out to the rest of the world, where we get to that sort of highest state of enlightenment or awakening, which would be conscious unity with everyone and everything around us. That's an elusive state. It's hard to live there all the time, but just to know that that's the goal the Enneagram is trying to get us towards, and I think that's the goal of all of our spiritual traditions. But so how do we get there? So the Enneagram is going to give us the toolkit to help us become our highest and best self. So as we move out of the dark night of the soul, we have what I call a faux virtue that we need to be mindful of. It's sort of your spiritual trap door that can get type 9s into trouble. And it's a virtue for other types, and it's a good virtue to have. But when misapplied, the type 9 can use it to justify their ego addictions and their worst vice. So the faux virtue for a type 9 is faith. And now I'm not referring to faith in a particular doctrine or dogma. That's not it at all. It's sort of that there's a saying, let go and let God. Like that's a good thing, kind of mantra to have in certain circumstances. But the type 9 can overuse it. They have too much faith that everything will work out just fine because they want to avoid conflict. So faith can be a way for them to sort of say, well, I'm going to trust God to handle it, when in fact it's the type 9 that should be handling it, because God's not going to work a miracle to solve a problem that you have the power to fix. And so essentially the 9 needs to be a little more assertive and more try to handle problems themselves rather than just having the faith that everything's going to work out just fine in the end, because it may not if you're not careful, especially in your financial life. So then if you can avoid that faux virtue, or at least acknowledge it when you're using it and try to use it less every day, then you move into your primary recovery virtue. This is your first real step to money mastery and mastering all aspects of your emotional and personal life, to be frank. But the primary recovery virtue then for a 9 is assertiveness, is willing to find your voice, speak up, be able to say what you think without being so afraid of rocking the boat, or that people are going to reject you or going to kick you out of your life simply because you're expressing your opinions about, like, I don't know, like, where do you want to go for dinner? You ask a type 9, it's like, well, what do you want? What do you think about this plan? Well, I don't know. What does everybody else think? Like 9s tend to, again, they're going along to get along, but that without some assertiveness, that deep anger that's hiding underneath all of this placid peace that they've tried to build for their life, without asserting yourself, you're never going to get your real needs met, and that anger is never going to get resolved, because you're always going to be angry that life isn't giving you or giving you the results that you really want. And how could it if you're not asserting what your needs really are, and nobody else knows what they are? We can't. Nobody can read your mind. So you need to really be able to tap into that assertiveness and present yourself more forthrightly, and that will help you get your needs met. But then you also have a secondary recovery virtue that needs to be paired with that, and that's modesty. Now, modesty is not humility. Those are two very different things. What I mean by modesty is an accurate self-assessment of your strengths and weaknesses without downplaying your strengths. right? So nines tend to downplay their abilities maybe too much, and modesty is going to maybe help you see what your strengths really are and what your real gifts are to give to the world, and also acknowledging your weaknesses and trying to mitigate those as well. So you having an accurate self-assessment of your strengths and your weaknesses through modesty, and when you pair that with assertiveness, now you get your greatest virtue for a type 9, which is right action. So where before, for all Enneagram types, whatever your greatest weakness is in your shadow structure, as you grow into spiritual and emotional health, that inevitably transmutes into your greatest strength. So where getting stuff done was hard for type 9s when they're living in their shadow structure, getting stuff done is actually their greatest virtue when they're living in their healthiest expression of their type, because it's that right action that's pairing your strengths with a kind of assertiveness and mitigating your weaknesses. And that's a sort of like having this really Zen approach to life and to problems. And then that fulfills the greatest hope for a type 9, which is to experience complete wholeness and peace of mind. That's the thing you've always been looking for, but you're never going to find that inner wholeness or that internal sense of peace until your needs have been met, until you've managed to assert your place in the world and really step forthright in your power. And then that wholeness is internal. You realize that no one can take it away from you because you've tapped into some deeper understanding of yourself as a fractal piece of the divine. There's that inner core, that inner essence inside you that you always was whole, always will be whole, and that nothing outside of you can really shatter that or take that away from you. And so conflict stops being such a scary thing because you're really grounded in your own personal spiritual practice, whatever that is for you. And you'll then finally have that peace of mind that you've been looking for and allow your sacred gift to come out. And the sacred gift, we all have a sacred gift to give to the world. And for 9, it's divine harmony. And what I mean by divine harmony is it's the peace that comes after the conflict is resolved. So when 9s, again, are unhealthy, they're avoiding the conflict. When they're healthy, they're confronting the conflict in a healthy way to lead to the harmony that comes after the conflict is resolved. And they do that more effectively than any other type because they're really good at seeing other people's perspectives, empathizing with other people's problems. They're really good at picking up the social cues from people around them, and then can use all of those skills to really be the masters of bringing more harmony and love into the world. And using now, and then they become the money master at that point. If they've worked on the 4 pillars of finance, they've overcome their anxiety or avoidance in the areas of earning, saving, investing, and giving, and have a healthy, secure relationship in all 4 areas, then they become the doer. They're not the spud, the dud. The doer is out there really getting stuff done in the world. And they're the great at taking action in the right way in order to resolve the many, many, many problems in the world around us and around them. And they can then use money becomes this great tool in their utility belt, their superhero utility belt, to go out there and use it for love and service for a suffering world and really bring more love, divine love, into existence. And find that whatever that crack in the world it is, it's broken, that you as a type 9 are uniquely qualified to fix. And it could be something very small in your immediate environment, and it could be very large, and you can work, start small and work your way out. But essentially, now you become that money master with all these resources at your disposal and can really make a positive difference in the world. But if you want more tips and tricks on how to do that, again, this is just a quick overview. Please check out my new book, Taming Your Money Monster, 9 Paths to Money Mastery with the Enneagram. Or you can go to my website, douglynham.com. You'll find lots of great resources there, a lot of good freebies. Please sign up for my newsletter. You'll get lots more tips and tricks into your inbox. And as always, if you like these videos, please remember to like them and subscribe to this channel. And I'll talk to you soon. Take care.